career as an athlete really started at Sheen Grammar School.
Correct.
Can you tell me where you were running and what you were running and what school sports and so on?
Well, yes, at the old Sheen Grammar School there weren't the buildings on the site there are now, and there was a 220 track marked out at the top end of Wallerton Gardens. And we had everything there. And amazingly, Terry, the sportsmaster, aided by Shackleton, who must have made the hurdles in his workshop, put on a hurdles event. And looking back on it, that was very unusual for a grammar school to do that, and to have two teachers who took the trouble with that, because there were very few grammar school boys in the hurdling world in those days.
And after that, you went to Liverpool University, and you continued your athletics there.
Yeah, my sprinting was still good enough to be in the team, but I also took up hurdling. I had probably something like 6 or 8 races, 2 at school and then about another 6 at Liverpool University. I was recruited by South London Harriers whilst I was at school through being a member of the local Air Training Corps. Tommy Thompson, the secretary of South London Harriers, realised that I had some hurdling ability, and on his own initiative he entered me for the Surrey Athletics Championships. And so out of the blue I won the Surrey Championships, which was a case of who is this chap Parker who's come from absolutely nowhere.
In his first year that Jack took up hurdling, he won the Surrey Championship. He trains every day of the week and does most of his running among the deer of Richmond Park. Not too much starch to keep his weight down to 13 stone. That's Jack's only dietary rule. His hobby is music, and whenever he travels with a team, he is never far from the track or the nearest piano.
On the strength of the Surrey Championships, I was given to John McSurier, who's one of the national coaches, and he helped me from then on. It was very lucky to be coached by him.
Because there weren't many coaches around then, were there?
Well, no, I think there was 1 chief coach and 4 regional coaches, 5.
Yeah. For hurdling?
Well, no, for everything.
For everything? Goodness me. And I believe you attended that every day, is that right?
Yes, my father took me along daily. I think my father would have been quite a good athlete himself if he'd had the chance. And he was very keen and he took me along daily.
As the 5-ringed Olympic flag is raised, 7,000 pigeons are released to carry into distant lands the message that the nations of the world are joined in friendly rivalry upon the field of sport. With the last winged messenger of goodwill in flight, all eyes turn to the entrance. From the darkness of the tunnel emerges a runner all in white, holding high the ritual flame. It is John Mark, medical student and a quarter miner, to whom has fallen the high honour of bearing the...
There was a bit of a rumpus about who was to carry the torch. Can you tell me about that?
It was traditional for famous athletes to carry the torch. And Sidney Wooderson of Blackheath Harriers, and either Blackheath Harriers or South London Harriers is probably the oldest remaining athletic club in the world, to carry the torch. And Sidney Wooderson was a slight chap. He was one of the people who might have had an Olympic medal if there had been Olympic Games during the war. He was known in the cross-country world widely, and a much respected chap. Quite short, great big spectacles, a lawyer, and he actually turned up on the day and found out on the day that he wasn't. He'd been dropped in favour of somebody who was, should we say, rather more photogenic.
He pauses, salutes the crowd with upraised torch, and then plunges it into the pedestal.
A lot of people thought this was very hard on Wooderson, didn't they?
Oh, of course, awful. Well, not only that it happened, but the way it happened.
Yeah.
And then in the straight with 70 yards to go, it happens. Mackenzie is in the lead, but drawing closer and closer is Winter, with the stride of a Goliath and the speed of a sprinter. Flashing past the tape, he wins the Olympic fastest 400 metres in 46.2 seconds. To Britons, resigned to a minor role in the Games, Wynn's triumph is a victory for the Empire.
I don't quite know how it worked, but Arthur Wynne used to run for Great Britain in international matches, but of course he ran for his native Jamaica in the Olympics, when you have to run for your country. And Arthur Wynne was a great man. He was a doctor, and eventually became the Jamaican ambassador to Britain. And he was a mountain man, and enormous stride length. I remember training him with him one day at Motspur Park, on the back straight, stride for stride with him. And I was just amazed. It was unbelievable.
The other star was Fanny Blankers' coon.
Of course.
The Dutch champion streaks away up the home stretch to win her third Olympic title in the excellent time of 24.4 seconds. 7 yards ahead of fast-finishing Audrey Williams.
Yes, of course, Fanny Blankers Cohen was the star. In her orange strip of the Netherlands, absolutely famous. And I think I'm actually saying she won the 100 metres, the 200 metres, the hurdles and the relay. And if she'd been able to enter them at the time, she'd probably have won the long jump and the high jump as well.
Britain's Maureen Gardner, a 19-year-old Oxford ballet teacher, has fought her way into the final and now challenges world champion Mrs. Blankers-Koen of Holland for the Olympic title. 6 of the world's top girl hurdlers make this the Olympiad's most exciting final. What a race, what a finish. Only the judges can separate them. A delighted, sparkling Maureen Gardner finds that she has equalled the world record, yet failed to win. Maureen lost, but never has there been a more gallant loser.
Maureen Gardner was a leading British lady athlete, brilliant hurdler, and she was also coached by John Le Mesurier. I remember him telling the story that one day she was a bit late arriving, then he suddenly saw her at the front, and there she was, and she sort of hurtled over the front edge into his garden.
Now, she was a very elegant hurdler, if I remember rightly, very stylish.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
A very elegant lady. No, I shouldn't say that.
Well, you can say that by all means. But you yourself, elegance was not your main asset as a hurdler. Tell me about your strengths as a hurdler.
I suppose fairly fast, not brilliantly fast, a very good stride length. For example, I never put my front leg through a hurdle. I just had the right length for the race, which was jolly good. And I think the ability to concentrate in big races. Out of 15 full-scale internationals over the years against, top countries, I won 9, which is quite a good record.
Fantastic. And I think you said you never hit a hurdle with your front leg, but with your trailing leg, you would often hit them and you'd be covered in cuts and scars.
Absolutely.
Tell us about that.
Hitting a hurdle with your front leg is a fatal thing to do. And I never actually did that. But my trailing leg was always a problem. I could barely get that clear. No account of hurling immediately after the war would be complete without reference to Don Finlay. Don Finlay was both a very good hurdler and a marvellous man. He competed in Berlin, the Berlin Olympics. He'd have probably won a gold medal if there had been an Olympics during the war, but there wasn't. And so after the war was, of course, the end of his career. But he was such a marvellous hurdler that we were all in awe of Don Finlay. And I'm rather ashamed of a statistic that I was, in fact, the first man to beat Don Finlay for 12 years. And this wasn't a genuine thing. It was at the Glasgow Rangers Ibrox Annual Sports. It was pouring with rain down there. It was like a bog. And the hurdles came up. And of course, me, great big weight and heaviness, and Don Finlay, light, hopping along. I beat him. And I beat him, of course, because the wet the wet ground.
I think that's where some journalist dubbed you the flying cart horse.
Yeah, it could be. Yes.
So you had a good day at Cambridge. Tell me about that.
Yes, that was a 220 yards hurdles.
Records fell like ninepins at Fenner's Cambridge yesterday when the 3A's team beat the university. A splendid performance was the double victory of J.F. Parker, who won the high hurdles, and in the longer race, the low hurdles, established yet another British record of 24 seconds.
Stinking hot day. And the Cambridge track is 3 laps to the mile. And there wasn't a full bend before the straight, so it was a sort of shortened bend and then a great big long straight, which meant you really get motoring on a long straight like that, and did. And the timing was absolutely right, and it just suited me that day. And it was a British record by a mile. But it wasn't recognised either because of the shape of the track or maybe the timing was out or something, I don't know. But I certainly ran a good race that day.
And I think about 10 years later they did actually change to a more orthodox track. As well as running at Cambridge, you also set a record at the Oxford Iffley Road running track.
Yes, which I think was Lord Burleigh's record.
Yeah. Helsinki Olympics.
Yes.
How did you get on there?
I reached the semi-final.
Yeah.
Got through the heat and reached the semi-final in a 6-lane final.
Yeah.
So that was
pleased
with that.
That was good. Yes. Yeah. Your hurdling career really took off after that when you started running for Great Britain. This all happened at the White City, I think, when you viewed home fixtures.
The home fixtures were the old White City Stadium.
And those days, it was a very, very amateur business.
Absolutely.
You were not paid. Tell me about how you had to get to the track and compete.
Well, looking back on it, it seems quite crazy, but first of all, we weren't provided with starting blocks. And so I had 2 separate starting blocks. And I used to have a case, a bag in it, which had my tracksuit, my spikes, a towel, 2 starting blocks, 8 nails, a hammer, and a tape, which is quite heavy. And I was living in Sheen in those days. And so from Sheen to the White City was a 33 bus. Wait for the trolley buses that went along to the White City, get on the trolley bus. And I remember often you used to stand on the trolley buses and then fight your way through the crowds to the competitors' entrance at the White City before competing with some of the best Americans in the world later on.
And after the meet was over, you had to then go back on the bus and
Yeah, of course.
And then in '54, that was the Bern European Championships in Bern. You did even better, I believe. Tell us about that.
Yes, that was the European Championships. I got through the heat and the semi-final, and then came the final, and there were 3 full starts. And I remember thinking, crikey, the starter's going to fire pretty quickly now. And I don't know, I remember thinking then, take your time, Jack, everybody's going to be very nervous. So I admit it now, I walked very slowly back. I was last down on the blocks, but by God, I was ready to go. And I got a jolly good start, and I held it, and I held it in the lead till about the 6 or 7 hurdle. And the Russian Balanchik went by. But I didn't mind because he was a nice bloke and a better hurdler than me. So I won a silver medal. Which now, ridiculously, I've done 1 or 2 things in civil engineering in my time. And yet if you can look me up on anything, what comes up? Not Hong Kong Airport or 7 Crossing or the Docklands Light Railway or any of these things. What comes up against my name is a silver medal in the European Championships.
The climax of the evening comes with the 5,000 meters race. Kurtz of Russia leads from Chris Chataway right from the start. Kurtz tries everything to shake him off, but Chataway keeps on his heels. A grueling pace this, and already Kurtz has smashed his own 3-mile world record. The last lap, and Kutz is still in front, with Chataway only a couple of feet away. The two other runners are nowhere in sight. This will be a world record, all right. Down they come to the last bend, and Chataway will have to make his final burst soon if he's to do it. Only yards to go now, and Chataway is pulling up on the Russian. Only inches ahead, hurls himself over the line. Roger Bannister is there to congratulate him on his shattering victory. But Chataway has smashed the world record in the fantastic time of 13 minutes, 51.6 seconds.
One of the striking features, when I look at the old photos and scraps of film, there seemed to be a lot of goodwill between the athletes. I mean, after the race, you'd all embrace each other.
Yes, absolutely right.
That's very nice. Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
No, I used to invite people back to Sheen for dinner afterwards. In mind you, in many of the events, there would be a proper dinner afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah. In 1954, you took part in what would now be the Commonwealth Games in Vancouver, but it had a different title then.
Well, it was an interregnum year, but they couldn't make out whether it should be the Empire Games or the Commonwealth Games. And so, as shown on the blazer I have, it says British Empire and Commonwealth Games, and the only event that's ever been given that full title.
How did you get on at those games?
I ran a lousy race and was fourth. I ran a good heat, and I was trying to keep up with Doubleday of Australia, and I wasn't quite as fast as him.
Yeah.
And I ran a lousy race, finished fourth.
But there was a famous race between Bannister and Landy in the mile.
Well, of course, there's a showdown race after Bannister had beaten Landy to be the first person to run the 4-minute mile.
Yeah.
Then I managed to overtake him. At the time, he happened to look over his left shoulder.
Watch for the burst of speed from Bannister now.
So he couldn't see that I was overtaking him. And then when he looked back to the front, I was already ahead and had sufficient advantage, holding that advantage until the take.
Roger Bannister on the lead. 90 seconds.
But the next year, 1955, you were the top herder in Europe.
Correct,
So
I was unbeaten in Europe.
Tell us about 1955.
I was ranked top in the world. 1955 was my best year.
This was a new Parker. It was not the fine old rugged battler who knocked hurdles down in rows of the European Championships and who won himself the friendly title of the Flying Cart Horse, but a polished artist who really seemed to run over the hurdles.
Right. Well, it was all coming together. It was running decent races.
And Moscow, you not only won, but you achieved a strange award.
Yes, well, Moscow was quite an event. We were the first British sports team to go to Moscow after the war, which meant we were feted. A funny story, when we arrived at the airport, the guard was out, the Royal Guard and everything, and we wondered whether that was for us. It wasn't. It was for Konrad Adenauer, who was coming in 10 minutes after we left it. So we pushed through the airport pretty quickly. But of course, to have Brits appearing in Moscow was quite something. And the stadium was absolutely full.
Moscow, a record crowd packed the Dynamo Stadium to welcome the first British athletic team ever to visit the Soviet Union. The match confirmed the great strides made by Russian athletes in recent years, but they couldn't match those of Jack Parker in the 110 metres hurdles. The British star won in 14.4 seconds.
And unfortunately, Bulanchik, who I'd run twice before, I'd gone to Moscow and I spent the whole summer thinking about beating Bulanchik. And when we arrived, I thought, well, this is it. I'm going to beat this chap today. He's beaten me 3 times before. and he didn't arrive. And I never found out why. I never asked. I never found out why Blanchett didn't appear. So I beat the one who did turn up, Stanier, off quite easily. Yeah, the Russians were very nice. They wanted me the Master of Sports second class. I was man of the match.
I met him, I think, in about October 53.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
And that was because he'd finished his training, and so he wanted a bit of social life, and he joined the tennis club.
Sheen Tennis Club?
Sheen Tennis Club, yes.
Ah, that's where you met, yeah.
Quite a lot of marriages.
Started.
Towards the end of the year, had a very eventful period of 2 months, because in 2 months I broke the British hurdles record at White City, proposed that evening to Shirley, won 4 more hurdles races, one in Moscow, one in Bordeaux, and I think another one in Prague, all around the place. Got married and went off to Nyasaland.
But it was such a total surprise that I said, yes, I'd love to go to Nyasaland.
And then for the next 2 months, he was very busy with his athletics, and you
Yes.
went to all those meetings, did you?
Yes,
Yeah.
and he spoke on BBC actually after his race in Moscow. And I don't know who it was who was interviewing at that time, but to hear him sort of sitting there, and I was sitting with my parents in London, oh yes, and they said that, yes, I'm going off to Nyasaland, well, we're getting married first, you know, and then going off, and then going, goodness knows what happens after that sort of thing.
At the end of the season, Jack married an East Sheen girl, Miss Shirley Newnham. It was a truly athletics wedding, for Surrey sprinter Dennis Newitt was the best man, and discus thrower Mark Farrow an usher.
And I think you got married in Christchurch, just over the road.
Yes, indeed.
And there's some photos I've seen of somebody sticking a hurdle down for you to walk across.
Mark Farrow was our best man,
Okay.
and he had somehow found a hurdle or a bit of stick or something, and so he put it out.
The photo shows the first hurdle of married life, and this is Mrs. Parker about to cross it.
And unfortunately, many of the evening papers had Shirley married off to Mark Farrow instead of me. It's been a source of amusement to us ever since.
Yeah. But
Probably just about. No, for the Melbourne Olympics I wasn't on top form because that summer we'd just come back from Nyasaland. We had Madeleine on the way, and then asked by the firm to go out to Hong Kong for 3 years, and so we weren't really concentrating a lot on athletics.
Yeah. And you went to the Melbourne Olympics with
Went to
Jack?
the Melbourne Olympics, yes, that was marvellous. It was marvellous. I felt a bit guilty about being there because Jack was in the village. I was staying with the aunt of a friend of mine, and I was pregnant, and I think it must have totally taken a bit of the edge off the race itself.
110 metres hurdles final. Favourite to win, Calhoun.
You didn't have a chance at the Melbourne Olympics because you had so little training behind you.
Oh yes, we were. They picked me out of goodwill, really.
All 3 medals to the Americans would acquire a familiar ring over the coming days.
And I think your abiding memories of the Melbourne Olympics was the whole political scene at the time.
Oh yes, Melbourne Olympics, of course, was the time, absolutely the time of Suez and the Russian invasion of Hungary into Budapest. And we arrived at Heathrow Airport, not knowing A, whether we were going at all, and B, the way we were going. And the pilot was sort of waiting for a route out, which swung clear of the Middle East. And so we went way north and went out through Tehran, and that was the story of us.
Your other memory of Melbourne, I think, was the closing ceremony.
Well, yes, the closing ceremony was marvellous. Remember that this had been a very happy games. I mean, Melbourne organised it brilliantly on the enormous Melbourne cricket ground, vast stadium.
Oh, it was marvellous, absolutely marvellous. I mean, even now I can hear it coming, just sort of welled up, you know.
And on the final day, somebody came up with the idea that instead of the competitors all marching around in teams, everybody would intermingle.
There was a Chinese boy who had written to the organisers and said, you know, the opening ceremony is very disciplined, you know, everybody walking around doing what they're told to do. But wouldn't it be lovely if they could all meet up with their friends that they'd made up during these 2 or 3 weeks? And they took it up.
Russian alongside American, German with Frenchman, Australian with Oriental, Occidental with European. The forward march of youth with common ideals.
And coming out on the blaring, on the microphone, people singing Will You Never Come Back Again, and Waltzing Matilda, and everybody joining in.
Waltzing Matilda, and then suddenly somebody started, Will You Never Come Back Again? And I've got tears in my eyes now. It really was tremendous. Something that you never ever forget.
Athletics in your day was very different from athletics today. You were all amateurs
Oh, totally. It was
So
a hobby.
tell us about the differences between today.
Well, it was a hobby and now it's a job. I mean, I remember 1 or 2 athletes who I won't name who were famous because they actually claimed bus fares for trips. And this was thought very interesting. He's claiming bus fares. Shouldn't do that. We're amateurs. It's ridiculous.
But do you regret the fact that you couldn't make a lot of money out of it?
Oh, no, I never made a lot of money. It's only the very top. Like many other sports, apart from football, rugby, and cricket, there aren't many people outside the top 20 who make a lot of money.
Yeah.
My advice to youth: remember, above all things, that athletics is a pleasure, not a business. Although most of us train more than many footballers, we enjoy it. This is one of the keys to success.
As the gun fired, Chris Brasher went into the lead and I slipped in effortlessly behind him, feeling tremendously full of running. My legs seemed to meet no resistance at all, almost as if impelled by an unknown force. We seemed to be going so slowly. Impatiently, I shouted faster, but Brasher kept his head and didn't change the pace. about the pace until I heard the first lap time, 57.5 seconds. In the excitement, my knowledge of pace had deserted me. Brasher could have run the first quarter in 55 seconds without my realizing it, because I felt so full of running. But I should have had to pay for it later. Instead, he had made success possible. At 1.5 laps, I was still worrying about the pace. A voice shouting, "Relax," penetrated to me above the noise of the crowd. I learned afterwards it was Stamford's. Unconsciously, I obeyed. If the speed was wrong, it was too late to do anything about it. So why worry? Noticed the half-mile passed in 1 minute 58 seconds. I was relaxing so much that my mind seemed almost detached from my body. It was incredible that we could run at this speed without strain. I was barely aware of the fact that Chris Chataway was now going into the lead. The effort was still barely perceptible. The time was 3 minutes 0.7 seconds, and by now the crowd was roaring. A 4-minute mile was possible. Somehow, to do it, I had to run the last lap in 59 seconds. Chataway led round the next bend, and then I pounced past him at the beginning of the back straight, 300 yards from the finish. I had a moment of mixed joy and anguish when my mind took over. It raced well ahead of my body and drew me compellingly forward. I felt that the moment of a lifetime had come. Those last few seconds seemed never-ending. The faint line of the finishing tape stood ahead as a haven of peace after the struggle. I leapt to the tape, like a man taking his last spring to save himself from the chasm that threatens to engulf him. My effort was over, and I collapsed almost unconscious with an arm on either side of me. It was only then that the real pain overtook me. I knew I had done it before I even heard the time. I felt as if I was too close to the failure.